Okay, thank you. So my name's David Crowe. I'm PVC and head of college, and I've come to just say a few words of welcome. Welcome to Camberwell. But being first up, I also get the job of pointing out the fire exits. There's one here and one here. There is no alarm planned, so if you do hear a fire bell, just follow the green man up the stairs and somebody will guide you out. It is a privilege to kind of say a few words to open this conference, because the engagement theme speaks really directly for us as a college to our values about social impact through art and design, and our values about the importance of partnerships inside the creative sector, like the one we have with the Horniman. In truth, we've worked with the Horniman for some time now, actually, over a number of years, but I think today's conference and the fellowship actually sort of mark the start of a new journey, really, and perhaps a different sort of relationship between an art school and a museum, one that we can perhaps disrupt and challenge a little. It also helps us to answer the question which vexes us quite a lot in the college, which is, what's the civic nature of an art school in the 21st century? How do we engage with the civic institutions outside of the school, and how do we engage with the locale as well as internationally? We're also privileged actually to have a keynote speaker. Fiona Raby has come in from New York. I'm hoping she's here somewhere anyway. There she is. She's no stranger to London, although she must be perplexed at what's going on at the minute in London. So welcome, and thank you very much for coming. In her book, Speculative Everything, Fiona describes two lists, List A and List B. I hope you'll remember those lists. List A is a list of things that are sort of traditionally associated with the practice of design. And List B was all the stuff that she found herself doing that was useful in the world. And across that divide, across that gap between the two lists, we had a list which was providing answers to asking questions on A, which had shifted to, a list that was about describing solutions to one that was about asking questions. A list which was about design at the service of industry, which is certainly where I grew up in my days as a student, to a list which is about the service of the citizen, and putting design at the service of society, where we focused perhaps not so much on the consumer, but on the citizen as the recipient. As a designer myself, I think I can see how liberating that can be, or could be, as an approach. Just like me, I think students today are sort of seeking the authentic. They're seeking a way that their design practice can actually make some real difference in the world. They want to know that it's not going to be all about commodity, that it's going to make some difference to some sense of wider citizenship. It's an opportunity maybe to influence some of the big issues through design practice that are very valid locally, but have some sort of international resonance as well. And through our discussions recently with the Horniman, it's really clear that actually they're interested in exactly the same sort of discussion, a discussion that's partly about perception. What is a museum? What's a museum for? What can a museum do? What do they do? And what bigger issues can you actually access through a museum by looking at that collection and that activity and those experiences in a slightly different way? So together as partners, I hope that the work we do will provide some kind of inspiration in that territory. It'll talk about maybe what's plausible, what's possible, maybe what's preferable in terms of engagement between a museum and the community that it serves, and what's possible and plausible between the relationship between an art school and a museum. So today, start of a new journey for us. I hope you really enjoy that day, and I think it's now my turn to hand over to Dan, I think, is coming up next.
Well, actually,
Tim is coming up next. Welcome, Tim, from the Horniman.
Thank you, David. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. Can I just have a quick show of hands? Has anybody been to the Horniman before? That's astonishing. That's great. I'm going to introduce my colleague Emma, who's one of our curators of natural history at the moment. Didn't have a chance to see the number of hands there, Emma, but it was good. So that's brilliant. If you haven't been, we'd love to see you. I'm offering you an invitation right now to bring your friends and family as well to the Horniman. It's a wonderful place. It's a museum, it's also a garden, it has an aquarium and a zoo and a butterfly house. And so, yes, we are a museum, but we're more than that. The collections are extraordinary. They are genuinely of international significance, of anthropology, of natural history, and of musical instruments. And they were all formed towards the end of the 19th century by tea trader Horniman. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about just very briefly was about how museums often, even 100 years later, bear in some ways the imprint of their foundation. So Horniman's interest in creating this collection and this museum was unusual. So it wasn't like the V&A or the British Museum or many of the civic museums that you see around the country, which are very interested in issues of social control and issues of rational recreation. Horniman had a very personal interest. I always have to read this out because I can never remember the quote, but his son said that Frederick's interest was in illustrating natural history and the arts and handicrafts of various peoples of the world. And his overarching ambition was to bring the world to Forest Hill and to enrich the lives of the local community. So enrich is an interesting term there. It's not about educating or informing. His travels took him to far-flung destinations such as Egypt, Sri Lanka, Burma, China, Japan, Canada and the United States, collecting objects which either appealed to his own fancy or that seemed to him likely to interest and excite those who had not the opportunity to visit distant lands. So Horniman's vision, and indeed our vision even today, is that the museum isn't about authority and fact, it's about imagination. It's about an opportunity to ask questions and discover. And one of the things that we are really excited about with the work that we are now doing with the Fellowship and Dan is that it gives us a chance to stretch that thinking. And so when Malcolm Quinn, who's in the audience today, is Associate Dean of Research here, and I were talking about setting up the Fellowship some years ago now, we were wondering how we would recruit a fellow. And we started asking a number of people replying some open-ended questions about how they would want to engage with the collections in this imaginative way. And a number of people came through, and Dan came forward and said he wanted to use science fiction as a way of understanding the collections and of developing engagement and wider appreciation and engagement and excitement around the collections. And that suddenly, ignited a spark in all of our minds. We thought it was very exciting. And Dan's been working with us for a couple of years now, delivered lots and lots of individual projects which have explored the collections in different ways and encouraged people to think about not just the collections but also different possible futures. And at a time when I suppose we're all thinking about different kinds of futures, and sometimes I feel like we're living in a reality which is alternative to the one that I imagined I would be living in. It's a really important function that a museum offers, a chance to imagine different futures. The other important aspect of this work is working with our collections. So we do have things, and that's an enormous advantage and something unique that museums bring. Dan's focus is looking at our natural history collections. So I just want to now just give Emma, who's our curator, one of our curators of natural history, a chance to talk to you for a few moments just about the collections, just to give you a sense of the basis and the assets, I suppose, to use a modern term, that Dan is using in this programme. So over to you, Emma.
Thank you for the introduction, Tim. As Tim mentioned, I'm Dr. Emma Nichols. I'm the Deputy Keeper of Natural History at the Horniman Museum, and it's a great pleasure to be here. So thank you to Dan for asking me to come along to just speak for a minute or two. I won't keep you. I know you've got more important things to listen to. Just about the natural history collection at the Horniman Museum. So the Horniman is split primarily between three collections: anthropology, musical instruments, and natural history. Seems a bit eclectic, but the reason for that, of course, is that was Frederick Horniman's personal interest areas, and that's where the Horniman Museum today started. So the natural history collection is about 250,000 specimens. It's not the largest natural history collection in London. Of course, there is the Natural History Museum, which is somewhat famous. But we have a huge collection of really exciting and amazing specimens. So we've got taxidermy, which is stuffed animals. We've got paleontology, geology, entomology, which is insects. You name it in the natural world, plants. We've got some of it at the Horniman Museum. Excuse me. So the keeper, Jo Hatton, she is an entomologist. She's currently in Costa Rica at the moment chasing insects, because that's what entomologists do. I'm a paleontologist, as I said. I'm a shark specialist, actually, and there's quite a lot of interesting fossil shark specimens at the museum. The reason I'm telling you sort of a bit more detail about specific things in the museum is to try and engage you in what kind of things that you could get involved with if you came to the museum. If you wanted to do some artwork of some of our specimens, we can get things out for you. Knowing the deputy keeper is definitely useful, so you can just get in touch, and we can facilitate any kind of research that you want to do. Well, you know, if you want to destroy specimens, we'll have to talk about it, but most kinds of research that you want to do. So I just want to also say a little bit about working with Dan. So I remember about 2-ish years ago, Jo and I were looking through the applications for the fellowship with natural history. And being a huge sci-fi fan myself, a major Trekkie, I'm not afraid to admit to you guys, or anybody else in fact, when I saw sci-fi written in the application on Dan's application, I immediately thought, oh, this sounds pretty exciting. And everybody else that was on the panel clearly agreed with me and thought it was an amazing project. As a scientist, I have relatively little to do with art in the broadest sort of sense. And so the last 18 months of working with Dan have been quite an exciting, weird, bizarre, but very awesome journey. And I'm really looking forward to the next 18 months, hopefully at least, that we're going to have Dan working with us. So thank you for listening. And if you've got any questions for natural history, just come and find me later on.
Hi, so firstly, I want to say thank you. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, David, for all of your words of introduction. Thank you to all of you for coming today. Thank you to all of our speakers for agreeing to take part. Thank you to Camberwell, for everyone at Camberwell for hosting us today. And a very big thank you to Gabriella, who is the true organizer of today's event and approaches these projects and tasks with a care and attention that just goes far beyond the call of duty and really allows everything to happen. So big thank you to Gabriella. I'm Dan Byrne Smith. My day job is a senior lecturer in fine art theory at Chelsea. But as you've heard, since autumn 2017, I've been very lucky to have this role. I think the official title is the Horniman Museum Art, Design and Natural History Fellow. And it has been a really kind of exploratory role. And it's allowed me to work with the museum, with its collections, with the staff, and to really kind of think about the different sort of audiences that the museum might want to imagine or create. And to think about, you know, reaching people and connecting with people in a way that's very outside of my comfort zone. And that's been quite difficult at times. It's forced me to really sort of adjust and reimagine how I do something. It's a very difficult, it's a very different environment to a lecture theatre or a seminar room. So, yeah, I've been approaching the fellowship with this simple premise. I'm interested in looking at the natural history collections through the idea of science fiction. I'm interested in privileging uncertainty, estrangement, and speculation. And my interest in science fiction and the use of science fiction has been really hard to separate from the work of Anthony Dunne and Fiona Raby, and their teaching work and their practice and their publications, which include the book Speculative Everything, have offered this amazing reconfiguration of the idea of design. And when I first read Speculative Everything, and every time I go back to it, I get sort of uncommon sense of excitement that I find rare in reading theoretical accounts of cultural practice. So it's uncommonly exciting for me. And it resonates with all of my interest in science fiction, and it resonates also with my interest in utopianism and utopian theories and practices. And these are things I've been thinking about for a very long time, and reading Speculative Everything really started to bring things together in ways that made total sense. It's like, of course, that's what I've been thinking about. It connects and unlocks a lot of potential within my long-term interests. So Speculative Everything opened up theoretical and practical possibilities that I'm still trying to think through in some ways, still trying to sort of unlock. Unfortunately, I'm a very slow thinker, and it takes me a long time to get things done. I'm a very slow writer as well. So today's event is another step, I think, towards this horizon that is opened up by Dunne and Raby's work. And I just read a very short passage from the book where Dunne and Raby offer a really concise account of what speculative design might be. So they say, this form of design thrives on imagination and aims to open up new perspectives on what are sometimes called wicked problems, to create spaces for discussion and debate about alternative ways of being, and to inspire and encourage people's imaginations to flow freely. Design speculations can act as a catalyst for collectively redefining our relationships to reality. So in terms of museums, my interests have moved from a more kind of historical and theoretical set of interests to thinking about some of the more practical dimensions, particularly around notions of engagement. At a very basic level, I'm interested in what Nina Simon describes in her book, The Participatory Museum, as the conversational object, the way that things in museums can just sort of spark forms of social interaction. And on the other hand, I'm interested in a slightly more esoteric field of what you might call experiential encounters, different modes of what it means to be in the presence of things within a museum context. And with this in mind, I'd like to briefly acknowledge a book and a research project titled Post-Critical Museology. The book was co-authored by Victoria Walsh, Andrew Dewdney, and David DeBoza, who is course leader on MA Curating and Collections at Chelsea. So the book was published in 2012, and it came out of a research project that Tate published a lot of the papers online in 2008. Now, they're looking very specifically at the idea of the art museum. So there's a specific set of problems and conditions, but the project proposes a kind of rethinking of institutions. It goes through some very detailed theorizing of museums as a kind of network. And this proposed model of network is one that imagines relations between people, ideas, and things. It's a really important project. It's one that I want to engage with more deeply and sort of think through some of the implications. They're interested in how theoretical analysis reveal histories, hierarchies, and structures of power, but they're also interested in how those forms of analysis have not overturned those things. Now, these issues resonate through today's event, and I'm interested in how speculative design as a tool can be used in the creation of subject positions and new social configurations. And these are the things that are discussed in that post-critical museology project. So I'm just going to quote something that David DeBoza wrote in one of his papers. He says, "To question an institution and its practices is seen as a means of placing the viewer's cultural agency in the service of the development of her subjectivity rather than in conformity with the institution's objectifying strategies." So he's proposing that to constitute the conditions of the museum and the encounter with the museum as a question opens up a new set of possibilities. It's not just the institution imposing something on them. So the question, he says, is, what is it that I'm doing here? And then he goes on, what do I want from this situation? Where am I? And he says this leads to a questioning of the self. What is being asked of me in this situation? Who is asking? Who am I? And for de Boza, this is like the grounds of a kind of subject formation. So I'm really interested in how working with a natural history collection can kind of affect these ideas of subject formation, particularly around agency. You know, if we're encountering the natural world, how then does our agency potentially change? How then might our actions lead to some kind of difference in the threats and dangers that are being presented to us? Now, I don't want to talk for too long, but I do want to sort of exploit this opportunity a little bit. And I want to talk about this kind of threat to hierarchy and knowledge. And I want to defend hierarchy and knowledge just very, very briefly. Or I would at least want to raise the question that maybe some forms of power and authority might need to be reaffirmed. And what I'm really thinking about here is a central role of curatorial expertise. Museums are not art centres. And unless they're actually art museums, they're not art galleries either. They may have very similar responsibilities to those other institutions, but they are specific and unique and different. And while authority, knowledge, and power need to be addressed and critiqued, relocated, and reconfigured, could an all-out attack on those forms facilitate harmful agendas and destructive policies? Questions about power, authority, and knowledge appear to be taking on a different set of problems and conditions. A notable and profoundly disturbing example of this is the axing of specialist curator positions at Leicester's New Walk Museum, prioritising instead posts designed for audience engagement. Now, while posts focusing on audiences, interpretations, and events are absolutely necessary additions to museum staff teams, what kind of thinking legitimizes the dismissal of expert curators from the museum? So this led to a statement by a group called the Geological Curators Group, who have members represented by the dismissed curators at Leicester. I'm just going to read their statement before I finish. The Geological Society, through its Geoconservation Committee and specialist groups, such as the Geological Curators Group, works to help conserve the diverse geology and rich geological heritage of the United Kingdom to ensure it is passed on to future generations in good order. In addition to conserving geological sites, it is also important to conserve geological collections. The collections held in museums and educational centres around the UK are a great national asset and contribute to UK culture, research, science education, and public engagement. As a result of major reductions in funding from central government, local councils and other government-funded bodies are under increasing pressure to make cuts to services. One of the areas that is facing significant cuts to funding from local government is regional and local museums and collections. They go on to say, this statement highlights the benefits and contributions that museums and collections, particularly local and regional institutions, make to society through their use in research, education, preservation of UK heritage, and public outreach. So the Geological Curators Group remind us that museums require expert knowledge, expertise, experience, academic study. Collections require professional, specialist curatorial expertise to care for them, to make them accessible to everybody, from the general museum visitor to the academic expert researcher. The group make it clear that the Leicester redundancies are detrimental to the future of the collections and the reputation of these museums. They write that the new posts, bringing additional interpretation skills, would have been welcome additions to the staff, but are completely unacceptable as replacements for curators. So I want to end with this idea that I agree museums are platforms. They are hubs for social activity. They are spaces for the formation of new kinds of subjectivities and networks. However, speculations regarding the future of museum engagement would be truly dystopian if they disregarded the expert curator.